I'm just
Hey,
going to.
hello.
Hey, Manoj, how are you?
Pretty good. How are you, Sam?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
been a long time.
yeah. It's been a while since we've had a conversation. I think the last time we had a chat was at Selenium Conf in India in 2018.
That seems to be right. Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah. What have you been working on since that Selenium conference in 2018?
A lot of things happened. I came back to Sydney for quite some time. I've been there for a couple of months, and then I came back to India. So what do I do right now? I've joined Thoughtworks recently. It's been around 4 or 5 months now, and joined as a principal consultant. Uh, right now working and helping an account per se as an architect.
Yeah.
Pretty much test methodologies and all that.
Well, that's pretty exciting. How did you find out about this role with ThoughtWorks?
I think it was through a referral. So it happened through Sai Krishna, happened to be one of my nice friends. It's all happened in the community, right? So Sai happened to be one of the PM committers, and likewise Srinivasan too. So I think both these boards were like, we might have a referral for you. It's like, okay, well, let's give it a try. That's how it happened. So I actually took a break for about three months after I left Aptly Tools, where I was in Sydney for a couple of months.
Mm-hmm.
So for personal reasons, had some break, and then I was like, okay, glad I was able to sit in a job before the pandemic started. But yeah, all in all, it's going well now.
Yeah, I've been trying to help a bunch of people with one-on-one career coaching sessions at the moment, and I keep trying to tell people networking is king, and that's like how you've got your most recent role.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So for anyone who's just joined online, do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself? Someone who doesn't necessarily know exactly what you do, give them a bit of
Sure.
a description.
Sure. Hey, folks. My name is Manoj Kumar. In short, you can call me Manoj. I'm right now with Thoughtworks as a principal consultant on the QA side of things, and also, tried a little bit touch upon the DevOps side. And if and when I get a chance, I do a little bit of UI development. I've been exposed to, React.js development a couple of bit, and I first do that. When if I didn't get an opportunity at work, I do, mostly on my open source stuff. Recently, I'm doing some of those stuff along with GraphQL in my open source repository, and I'm, able to talk about a little bit. I know Sam has some interesting questions around that. So, and community activities for ThoughtWorks, internal, external, and helping the region wise, and a lot of multiple hats within ThoughtWorks for me at the moment. It's exciting. It's been 4 months, and loving it already. And prior to ThoughtWorks, I've been with Apply Tools in Sydney. I used to work alongside Kanika and Satish. So these two names are, it's often you must be hearing it in some of the external events, in at least for the OS community as per se. And then I used to work from India as well. So working from home for about 3 years now. When I'm not traveling, so at least that gave me a path to not being new, during this pandemic situation. So and before that, I used to work for IAG Insurance Australia Group. I used to be there for around 3 years, and then I also worked for New South Wales Department of Education. It was a short-term gig for about 3 months, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think I used to be a test lead there. And back then, I know in India, I was working for multiple accounts, and I used to consult with Wipro Limited. And yeah, I think basically that's my
Yep.
professional career from where I'm now to where I was.
Yep.
And throughout this journey, I've been an open source contributor as well. So while the professional journey happened throughout my career, I think my open source contribution started back in 2009 or 2010, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
It started with Selenium, and then a couple of libraries along the way. I think a lot of tools, a lot of frameworks and libraries in open source,
Yep.
at least from the testing community perspective. So yeah, I've been contributing to that, and whatever works for the community, whatever help, be it conferences, be it meetups, I've been doing wherever I get an opportunity to do so.
Yep. When you were first getting involved with open source projects, how did you convince yourself you could actually add value? I think a lot of people think that they don't know anything, they can't add anything useful, or they might view it as too hard. How can someone overcome that mindset when they're first trying to start contributing?
Cool. That's an excellent question to start with. But if you are thinking that, that's absolutely wrong. You could make a difference. I'll be happy to run through my journey in a short so that, the way that I started, I think to where I am right now, I think all the credit goes to people in the Selenium open source team, particularly Simon Stewart, the project lead. So I started contributing, and the motivation for me to contribute was more around, back in 2009, 10, it was Selenium RC, the first version of Selenium, which was out there, and WebDriver, really gets started over there. And I was with Wipro earlier, and I, was to happen to a POC where I needed more information. The documentation was not up to that stage. Just like the other OSS projects struggle. So that's when I joined the IRC Slack channel for Selenium, and the community is very welcoming, unlike the other OSS that I've seen across these years. And any dumb questions, yes, there will be an answer. So that really motivated me to ask more questions, to get clarifications and all that. And I documented all of these. And one day I was like, okay, these questions might pop up for anyone that might, be new, who's getting started into Selenium. So I thought, okay, why not we look at contributing to docs? And so that's when I had a chat with other guy called Santi. He's called Santiago. So he used to be at Sauce Labs before. And there's also other gentleman called Tarun. So he was from India earlier. I think now he's in Germany, or I don't know where he's. So I used to chat with those two folks, and of course Simon was there. So my first contribution to Selenium itself was to write a definition for what Selenium WebDriver is. So that's how really it started. So we really didn't have a proper definition of what Selenium WebDriver is, or if people migrating from Selenium 1 to 2, what would that really mean, right? So that's how my contribution started. I think over the period of time, adding a couple of chapters to the documentation. So we earlier we had in RST, now it's in Markdown. So and then gradually started to look at code, and then contributed a couple of APIs to the JavaScript bindings, and then used to do a lot of testing for the new builds for Selenium, and used to share any bugs in the channel. So that's how my contribution has been. So even if you do things that help the team, that is still added as a contribution, even though that might not known to an outside world. That's totally fine, but the team that you work with know that how helpful you have been. So that's really important. And I think started with documentation, and then a little bit of code, and then expanding a little bit. They needed someone to help with the conference, and that's how I started helping conferences. And right now we are forming a team, project leadership. So right now I'm one of the members of the project leadership committee for Selenium. And yeah, we can talk a little bit about that. And that's where typically my open source journey has been.
Okay, cool. Do you remember what that original definition of what Selenium was?
It was very simple. I was trying to derive a formula where things. I wanted to be very simple. So people know WebDriver is a protocol. We had a JSON wire protocol and Selenium RC, and then WebDriver protocol was there. So people are getting confused about it. So I proposed it's like what if we say Selenium 1 plus WebDriver is equal to Selenium 2.0. So that's how we arrived at, and that kind of helped. And if like Selenium 2.0 was the Selenium WebDriver. So Selenium 1, we still had the backward compatibility. So that means that the Selenium RC code still exists, but we also, plugged in the WebDriver protocol. So essentially Selenium 1 code base plus the new WebDriver protocol happened to be Selenium 2.0. So that's, and then, how I think I came up with 3 or 4 bulletin points on the differences between RC and WebDriver. So that's it was, if I remember.
Okay. Yep. That's a good initial commit, right?
Absolutely.
What is Selenium? And here's an overview.
Yeah,
So
making the fundamentals right.
yeah, there we go. So you've been working on Selenium 4. What's coming up with the new release of Selenium?
A lot of exciting stuff. Selenium 4, I think firstly, why the new number? I think number of reasons, because a lot of groundbreaking features are coming in. So I recently wrote an article for ApplyTools. I think we could share a link later. It's at ApplyTools blog, and a number of things. And if you look at Selenium project itself, it's not just one project or an API. It's a suite of tools, right? It's a family of tools where you have tools that cater to different user needs. Selenium IDE for someone who's getting started, who doesn't have much of a coding knowledge, like BA or a coach or anyone new can get started with. So I think starting with Selenium IDE. A lot of new features are coming in. I think one of the most expected features of Selenium IDE we are still working on is to bring in an Electron application on top of how Selenium IDE is right now. So Selenium IDE, if you look at right now, it's available as a browser plugin. So earlier it was just available with Firefox, and ApplyTools came on board with an intent to help the open source community, and they're doing it very well now. So Dave Heifner, one of my close friends, and Tomar. So these folks are working on Selenium IDE right now. So since Firefox said no more to the XPI extensions, we kind of stuck in the old version of Selenium IDE, I think back in 2017 or somewhere. So that mandated, we want to create a new plugin in a new mechanism called web extensions. So the new Selenium IDE is based on web extensions. So that means that any browser that's supporting web extension as a browser plugin mechanism, they could easily use Selenium IDE on top of it. So to give you a little example, so Selenium IDE, the actual development started in Chrome and Firefox. Things started as a single code base, and now that Microsoft Edge, you have been hearing news, has adopted, coming into the Chromium family. It was, so easy to, plug in Selenium IDE on top of Microsoft Edge, because they are all end of the day belonging to the same Chromium family, and they all use web extension. So that is how it's been helpful. So that's one of the key improvements. And in Selenium WebDriver as an API, we are doing quite a few stuff. Improved error messages, new window-based commands like maximize and stuff. Creating a new tab which wasn't there earlier, and of course new window was always there. And a lot of things in WebDriver, like small things which could deprecate, and so the things, if you see something is deprecated, which will sure be removed in the actual version which is going to be released. And we're going to, I think Alpha 7 is going to be the last alpha release. So we have at least 6 versions of alpha. If folks for try to try it out and come back with any errors that they might have, and hoping, I think in the last discussion, Simon mentioned, hopefully Alpha 7 is going to be the last alpha version, and then we will start rolling out the beta versions. And so that's WebDriver. And in Selenium Grid is many things coming up. So we're getting rid of the old UI, which happened to be, having a looks of 80s and 90s. So we're still working on a new UI prototype for the Selenium Grid console, where you would see how many browsers and how many nodes you have. And so a couple of folks from Browser Stack, they formed an open source team, and they are helping with that as well. And we are also adopting GraphQL in Selenium code base. So unlike in earlier version in Selenium, we expose REST APIs to query for how many nodes you might have, and how many slots are filled in and all that. But I think in Selenium 4, we have GraphQL. And I think with single endpoint, as you know, I think we'll talk about GraphQL in a minute. But single endpoint, you query what exactly you want, and you get those results. So that's grateful. And we also revived the documentation and website. If you earlier website was seleniumhq.org, but now it's selenium.dev. Completely new website, new documentation. Kudos to Diego Molina, and so he and I worked on the website and documentation. And there's massive effort done by Sri Harsha. He's based in India. He recently got commit bits. So yeah, a lot of things for Selenium 4.
Yep. Okay. Cool. I think that is a good segue into GraphQL. Then, if we just mentioned it, then, what would you
Sure.
say, like from a API design point of view? What are the main differences between a REST API and a GraphQL API?
Sure. There's many differences actually. I think API development, I think sets a backbone for any communication, right? So the way that we both are talking right now is internally the unsung hero, I would say, is really the API between, the whereby.com's API and also people listening, through Twitch or, the same platform, wherever you could be, right? So API is very, very important. I think the world is moving towards API driven development first, having in microservices now and all that. So when I started, I used to work with my first API encounter was with SOAP services,
Mm-hmm.
which is service-oriented architecture. Heavy project had around 18, 19 services with SOAP architecture. We had schemas, WSDL files. And prior to that, it was WADL, WADL, and a lot of things. So I think API development itself has gone, evolved a lot, I would say, starting with SOAP services and then REST services has been dominating the industry for around 10
Mm.
years now. And I would still see REST services will still be there, given the new upcoming kid in the town, GraphQL, even that comes up, REST API would still go. So I think in terms of, I hope that set up a context of what the REST and how GraphQL came. So I think GraphQL, I think the reason why it came up is from an interesting encounter from Facebook team itself.
Mm.
So when Facebook started, they didn't really had a mobile app. It was basically Facebook on a web browser on a mobile device, where
Yep.
it would still use the same APIs, pretty much whatever it used to be people use in the desktop. So
Yep.
it had a lot of problems like same API is consuming a lot of network problem, data consumption, and all that, which wouldn't really work on a mobile because right now we enjoy 4G and 5G, but I think back in days it was pretty
Yeah.
much just 3G, 2G, or Edge for that matter.
Yeah, and I think back in the day as well, Facebook had a whole bunch of web engineers who knew JavaScript, but they didn't have a lot of native app developers, and so they actually invested in building a framework to create React Native, so that they could uh, convert all of their web engineers into mobile engineers as well. So I think that also flows into that's a bit of context, I think, with the history of Facebook and why they're kind of a big proponent behind GraphQL as well.
Absolutely. I think that's also one of the groundbreaking things for Facebook itself. So GraphQL, I think how it's different in number of factors like versioning. I think if you want to make a change to the API, end of the day, the developers would make it, version 1, version 2, and then testers had to test all these versions of the same API, which is boring as well as time consuming, and you have a lot of repetitive tasks. But unlike in GraphQL, there's no versioning. If something is not there, you mark it as deprecated and you still hit the same endpoint and get the data. I think the fundamental difference is, I would say what you ask is what you get, right? So say you have a blogging platform, and the blogging platform has three APIs. One, I think the end goal for you would be to get a list of articles that the author had written, right? If that is your end goal, try any blogging platform like WordPress, for example. So you'd be having an API to hit, what is the user that you're trying to hit, find, and that response would hit a user ID. And using that ID, you would find different categories, and within that categories, you find what other articles. So there's at least you're hitting 3 or 4 APIs out there.
Mm.
But unlike in GraphQL, it's one endpoint. It's an easy querying mechanism where you exactly ask what you want and you get it. So I think the main difference is overfetching and underfetching, right? So that has been always a problem with REST API. So say for example, on the first request that I spoke about, when you hit request with a specific username, it would come back with all the response parameters, right? So it could be user ID, user name, user age, email ID, and all that. So you may not be needing all those, when you hit that request. So which is like overfetching. So overfetching is all about
You're getting too
um,
much data.
yeah, you don't need that, but it's fine. It's still coming up. So I think GraphQL kind of want to eliminate that and ask what exactly you get. So in that way, it was helping. That is much needed in a mobile platform, and pretty much for all the handheld devices for that matter. which is also helping in a lot from a performance perspective. Instead of you getting all the bunch of things back to you, I think if you get only certain things, that's pretty much useful. So that's one aspect, and I think it's still based in JSON format. I think kind of a JSON format, but it's a GraphQL structured JSON. Um, when you compare between REST and GraphQL.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think number of testing ways that you could do.
Mm-hmm. I think the analogy I like to make for GraphQL is well, it is a query language, or it's got query in the description. So I guess some people can kind of think of it like having SQL in an API format. I don't know if that works as an analogy all the time, because you don't really, if you say it's like SQL but for an API, then my first thought is like, well, is it secure? Like SQL injection is one of the biggest vulnerabilities on the internet, and if you got SQL in your API, does it? And that's an interesting question. It's just maybe I won't use SQL for an API
No,
as an
no, no.
analogy because of those security connotations.
No, not
Um,
really. I think people, I know it's fair to have that assumption, right? So because it has the, I would say the surname is QL, so it's definitely it's query language. I can actually share my screen quickly if you
yeah,
all
yeah,
could
that's fine.
see. Yeah, so right. This is what I meant about, right? So you query what you want, it hits the client, goes to the GraphQL server, you have your response and comes back to the client, right? So
Mm,
that's typically how it works. And the example that I was giving about is exactly up here, right? So if I just scroll down, so on the left where you have this is the GraphQL, right? So on the right, you have the REST API. As I mentioned, you have ID, you have posts, and you have followers. So there's a number of three kind of REST APIs that you need to hit. Like unlike the first one, you get the ID, and then the posts learn GraphQL today, and then how many followers I have. So typically, if you see the content, the comments, the birthday, address, name, these are all unnecessary, which is like overfetching of the data that I wanted as a client, right? So I think GraphQL, the groundbreaking thing about GraphQL is it's completely client driven. So that's the major differences. And speaking of differences, I think it's here as a tabular format for anyone to look at. It's available in test projects. As I said, it's a client-driven architecture rather than a server-driven, unlike that was based in REST. And yeah, I think the main difference is, queries and mutations are the things that you'd be handling with. And like in REST API, everything is CRUD services, create, read, update, and delete. So mutations are nothing but it's a way for you to, create, update, or read. It's basically these operation into your mutations. And query, I think in the GraphQL, it's nothing but the graph, and then the QL stands for query language.
mm-hmm.
And graph is nothing but you can see an interconnected as the logo here, right? So it's all interconnected. That's how you could say it as.
Mm-hmm. In terms of tools that you can use for testing a GraphQL API, I know most of the tools on the market that people are more familiar with, like Postman and RESTlet and whatnot. Oh, you've got a link. There we go.
Yes.
Cool.
So
What's the maturity like for some of the tools for testing GraphQL APIs?
it's a little different. I would say anyone starting new with GraphQL, I would suggest learning the fundamentals. As I said, GraphQL itself, I think if you've worked in already in API testing, that will already be easy for you to get the concepts of GraphQL, because end of the day, it's coming from the same family, but new ways of naming things.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a number of things. As I said, how do you test declare? I think when it comes to GraphQL, I think stepping back a little bit, I think with testing REST APIs, you typically do request response, JSON payload, different combinations, testing a schema per se. But I think testing GraphQL itself, it's not just you request, you get the response and validate it. There's much more things that you could do. GraphQL itself is completely backed by a schema definition language, which is more like you define a schema how a particular API would look like. So which brings up a lot of opportunities for teams, right? So the backend team can work on their own and the front end team can work on their own. That's one of the main advantages of defining a schema and queries, mutations, resolvers, and stuff like that, right? So I think resolvers are nothing but pure JavaScript functions which are responsible for the query that you're sending. And mutations, as I said, it's nothing but a way for you to create, read, update, and delete the operations. Like in this case, if you're creating a user, updating a user, updating a post, updating, and comments or anything that will lead obviously through mutations. So the number of things that you could test in GraphQL itself, like as you know, unit test, integration test, and then an end-to-end test using an API with different tools. So you could look at how do you do via Postman, REST assured, REST Karate, and there's also libraries from add-ons from test project. And there's also other guy named Vimal Selvam. So he came up with a Java library that you could test with. Yeah, there's a number of ways to test. I think in short, the only catch is if I have it here. So all of these tools, right? I think rest assured REST shop, you'd be sending the JSON payload, right? You just have to do the same thing from GraphQL, but you can't directly copy paste a query, right? Because a query would look something like this as I type in this GraphQL. So query open braces, and then I want a movies list of a particular name and then a genre of the movie. When I click enter, so this is what I get: the matrix, inception, inferno, and all that, right? So this query on the left side, that as you see in this image that's typing in, so this is not exactly a JSON format. So you need to find a way to convert that into a JSON format. And once you do that, it's easy to use all your existing framework and tools per se. And that is exactly what I've written in this blog post. And you could see, how do you do that?
Okay, cool. That is a really useful link, and I'll make sure to share that around with anyone. Post event, we might have a blog post hosted somewhere with a link to this recording and a whole bunch of the useful resources generally in the description. So actually, when we post it up on YouTube, we'll do that. We'll put a link in the description to a whole bunch of these useful resources, because I'd be interested in reading a little more. So coming back to the year 2020, we're going through a pandemic at the moment. How has the pandemic impacted the organization behind a Selenium conference?
Oh, a lot actually. I was hoping when you meant organization, you would touch upon Thoughtworks, where the answer was easy that it's fine. People kind of started adapting to work from home. But I think since you mentioned Selenium conference, the answer is very different. It impacted a lot, I would say. We're still figuring out, what we could do the best for the community. So as you know, the Selenium conference in India happens every alternate years, and then and then the other year happens globally. So this year we were supposed to happen one in June in India, Bangalore, and in November we planned one would happen in Chicago. So we kind of decided that Chicago conference would not happen in November. We are actually postponing it to the next year. And it was fine because we were in early stages. I think we kind of just paid for the hotel in Chicago, but I think the hotel, we are just in negotiating terms with contracts to see we could get the same dates the next year and all that. It's figuring out. It's still fine. We can catch up with that. But unlike the India conference, it's way more than that, because we pretty much, the program is ready, the speakers are selected, the venue, the hotels, everything was booked, and even a couple of speakers, international speakers, has booked flights. So it was kind of hard to move. I think it's not only Selenium conference, all the other conferences are facing that. But personally, I kind of understand what is it to undergo all of these. So we actually moved it to September, but even September seems to be very hard because Indian borders wouldn't open up. And even though, and I heard in news that England opened up doors for, international travelers from a couple of countries, but I don't see India opening up because the cases are gradually coming up high, and it's high risk, and we don't want that to be risk for all our community.
Mm.
So we haven't decided anything, so I don't want to give you an informal communication, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to understand like the impacts because well, no one was planning on having a pandemic, and and I think people are used to how it's impacted their work if they're still in work at the moment, or if they've been made redundant. There's more support and practices, and more companies are doing remote only work, or supporting people working from home more often. I feel like that's very people have a better idea of what's involved with that. It's just when you're running an in-person conference and your country's got social isolation restrictions in place and closed borders, that puts a big strain on running events. And I'm involved with the YAO conference here in Sydney. We've had to postpone, or we've tried to move some of our conferences online. YAO Data last week was online. We've got YAO Lambda Jam, which is functional programming, and we've tried to move that online as well. But it's also really hard to do ticket sales for online events. People get a lot of value out of in-person events. The act of seeing someone feels more tangible to people. Have you attended any online conference recently?
Online conference, not the entire conference, couple of sessions, I would say. The recent one was the GITS Developer Summit that's happening right now from an architecture, I think the track. It's been fun. I think it depends. I think we're also planning something. I think at least I could say this. I think the Selenium conference, as far as concerned. So I think in India, we are associated with Conf Engine. I think it's through Naresh Jain. He's been organizing a lot of conferences, like big conferences like Agile India, and other conferences like Open Data Science and all that. So he has a professional team behind the conference, and they kind of helping us set this tone up for us. I think there's been a lot of requests like ticket refund and all that. We are trying to handle that. Hope people also understand the fact that it's completely inevitable and it's not our fault or even your fault. That's natural calamity, right? So tough situations like that happens, and we're still trying to do. But also we want to keep the brand alive and keep the community engaged. So we could come up with something like an online event. For Selenium conference, which is we're still in talks and we're still yet to decide and the format, the speakers and all that. But eventually, some information would be soon out there. So that's
Yeah.
something I think I just missed out on the previous question. I hope that covered up now. Your conference, yeah, I've attended a couple of things. Michelle, I had an interactions with her on a couple of things, and I think when Angie Jones, she's part of Apply Tools. When she came down to Australia, we had a meetup, and it was fun. I think your conference has a massive following, and it's a conference of its own standards, I would say.
Yeah,
It's completely
there's
different.
yeah, but it's challenging in a whole bunch of different layers, trying to convert or trying to transition from an in-person event to an online. People expect the ticket prices to be cheaper, even though it's the same quality of speakers. One of the really interesting conference ideas I've seen, I think it was called Deserted DevOps Island. And it was a DevOps conference hosted in Animal Crossing.
Okay, interesting.
I wasn't able to attend because it was in the US time zone, so it was a little bit late. But someone just opened up their Animal Crossing island. The speakers would come on and they would project their slides onto a PowerPoint kind of overlay view behind their Animal Crossing avatar. And I think they streamed. I think they streamed it to Twitch or some other platform, and it was just like a really fascinating idea. And this was right in the middle of the whole pandemic was really kicking off.
Something to look at and smile.
Yeah, so I think there's people are trying some creative ideas for how to run online events. So if someone
True.
was looking to get up to speed with Selenium and they hadn't really worked with it much in the past, where would you recommend they start learning?
Um, I think it depends, really depends on the background of a particular person. I think if they are coming from a complete QA background where they're not exposed to coding, that's one of the extremes. Another extreme is, completely coming from the API world. I want to, get my hands wet in the UI automation space. How do I do it? I could handle, answer in both ways. For someone starting out new, coming in with absolute programming knowledge, I would say, start with the language first, because that's always helpful. So tools like Selenium, it's kind of an API that you would use, yeah, which has its, if you look at Selenium, we offer APIs in multiple languages, right? So you have JavaScript, Java, Ruby, C Sharp. And the fundamental for anyone to get started with Selenium would be to learn at a language, which will always help you, be it in the development of a framework or writing your test script itself. So start small with understanding basic concepts of object-oriented programming, and that's typically how frameworks evolve, by using multiple concepts like inheritance, objects, classes, and all that. So without that, it's nothing. So learn a language, pick a language of your choice. If you have studied any language in a university, and if you could piggyback on something on that, that'll be really easy. And then start with small examples, like hitting Google, searching for something, and that's one way to start. And if you already know programming, then it's pretty much easy. You just have to look at the API documentation and know how things work. And I think we have getting started examples in our Selenium documentation. So you could take a look at that. By just reading the code, you would understand how things navigate through. We have kept the APIs in a very native format. So I think, to just give you an example, so one of the first things that you would do is, in any programming, to create an object, right? So as I said, WebDriver is an API. So to use that API, you have to create an object for it. So that goes by WebDriver, and then whatever object that you would want it, and then followed by new, and then you implement, you consume one of the interfaces that we have. It could be a remote WebDriver, Chrome driver, or Firefox driver for that matter. And then the next thing that you would do is to go to an application under test for that, right? So say google.com. So you would use something like driver.navigate, .2, and then have the URL per se, and then all the click actions and send keys has its relevant APIs itself. So I think one of the things that I used to do in one of my trainings, for someone doesn't come from a technical background, is I used to have a tabular format, where I would say, okay, let's pick a scenario and list down step by step how someone could achieve it manually, right? So that's basically nothing but going back to your olden days of having your test steps in an Excel sheet, right? So this is more like a at a high level structured format. So write in simple words, and say, if anyone want to, right? So that's how that's all about the test steps in a test case. It's all about, you write something on how you could start from point A to point B, and anyone could do it, right? So that's all about the documentation. So document that, and on the left side, have the WebDriver APIs, and see what is the nearest API that you could think it could work. So it's like an exercise that I do, and 95% people usually come up with the right APIs. So that's how easy it has been, and friendly, I would say. And then it's a matter of bringing in your language experience, and then putting that in a proper code, and then start with a standalone example, and then go further using design patterns like screenplay, page object, and all design patterns comes into picture. So that's how I would go about it.
Okay, cool. In your profile, this is going to be a slightly off-topic question based
Okay.
off our conversation so far. You mentioned advocating for accessibility.
Right.
What does an accessible web look like?
Well, in short, it's all about making your website accessible for everyone. So when I mean everyone, it includes people with disabilities, right? So are people with impairments, I would say. So I think calling disabilities, it's more rude, what I heard over the time, but it's all around people have impairments, but people can still live with its impairments, right? So I think to give you a real life analogy, I think in a couple of conference slides, I always used to have that to just give up a context, and I think I could do the same here. Say a person is on a wheelchair, right? So what happens if there is no ramp, right? How could he or she get up to the door where he or she wants to go, right? If there was a ramp, it's much easier. But what if there is a no ramp, right? So that's basically how I would take that real life analogy into web. So we all develop web applications and mobile apps, but I think it's end of the day, do you have that ramp? So
Mm.
that ramp is all about short in short you call it as accessibility, and is it accessible by everyone? So that's in short, I would say, a short 1 minute introduction to
Yeah.
accessibility for anyone new. And there's a number of ways to achieve accessibility. It's a deep topic itself, and I love to talk about it. So what do I do when I mean by advocating accessibility is all about um, telling them about the importance of accessibility and how important it is, why an accessible app would be helpful, how it could be helpful, basically answering how, what, and why, with practical examples from a testing point of view as well as from a development point of view. So that's how really I got it. So when I mentioned earlier, I happened to do a little bit of React frontend. It all happened through my research work and my mm, uh, through researching for accessibility. How do you create an accessible React component? Stuff like that is really where it started.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I think to elaborate on that, uh, accessibility for web. Usually, people think about vision impairment, people who can't see, hearing impairment, people who have difficulties hearing. If you've got audio content, also like click perception. Like if someone's got hand tremors, there's actually some cool Chrome browsers which will simulate accessibility or different types of abilities. There's disability simulators like Funkify, and there's an open source one as well. But yeah, if someone's got hand tremors and you've got like a tiny little button to click, it's going to be really hard for them to click on something.
Absolutely.
So it's really just considering those design considerations and how people are going to use it. And I have a real life example just yesterday. Um, Disney Plus has. I'm doing a plug for Disney Plus. Hamilton, the musical, they just
Right.
put on their platform yesterday, and I love musicals. But because they're rapping quite a fair bit, it's very. There's a lot of hip hop, and they're talking very quickly. I watch all movies with closed captions, and I'm not deaf. I might have some small amount of hearing loss. I just really like being able to read while watch a film because it means I don't miss anything. If there's like a bad accent or there's something really hard to hear, I don't have to be concerned or question. Hey, what did I just missed that joke? What was that joke? Um,
Yep.
but yeah, so I use closed captions on everything, and this is there's a benefit to building in accessibility into your web and mobile experiences called the ramp effect. So you know how you got the curb cut side effect. If you add curbs, which were originally designed for people in wheelchairs to navigate streets, a whole bunch of other people will use them who aren't necessarily suffering from the same issues. So, for example, a delivery guy now uses that curb cut to help get things in and out of his van. A mother pushing a pram along or a father pushing a pram along will now use that to help navigate the street as well. There's a bunch of people who benefit from you building accessibility into your web. One of the challenges I've experienced though is it's quite hard to automate testing for accessibility and web. Do you have any experiences or stories to share along those lines?
Yes, so when I meant about research for accessibility, that's what I did, mainly to help testing community do some of this as well. So I could, keep talking about for an hour or so. because I've done a number of conferences on the similar topic. I would, quickly like to share again and
Go for it.
show something that could do. And I think this is exactly what you meant about, right? So I think for anyone looking at the screen, that could help you really, right? So there's a person sitting on a wheelchair, there's also a person shoveling the ramp, and there's a couple of kids waiting to get in there. So I think I'll just,
Oh
take a
yeah.
pause for a moment so you could learn it. So
Oh yeah. If he had shoveled the ramp first, everyone would be able to use it.
absolutely. So that's all about accessibility. So yeah. So impairments, disability, as I said, it's not or someone with born disabilities or impairments, right? It could be multiple personas. So
Yeah.
could
There's
be
also
permanent, temporal, and
temporary.
situations.
Yeah. I've broken my ankle. I couldn't walk for 12 weeks, and I got around in Sydney on a little knee scooter. I only just recovered from that before I went to Selenium Conf in Bangalore. I was still limping around and just
Like, yeah.
out of a moon boot, and I didn't I took for advantage like the public transport here in Sydney and the support for wheelchair users is sure it's not perfect, but it was better than what it was in Bangalore.
Absolutely. So I think the similar encounter that I happened, right? So I used to play basketball professionally, even though I'm short. I used to be a point guard. So when I was at IIG in Sydney, I used to participate in corporate tournaments. Usually, happens in the city. And when I happened to play that, I twisted my knee, and I happened to do a ACL knee construction surgery. And
Oh,
after that, I couldn't come to work for at least 3 months. So I used to live in Homebush, a suburb in west side of the Sydney, and it's a short 30 minutes in train. But if you look at the Homebush station, there used to be no ramp or even lift, but I
okay.
glad it was there when I actually moved out. But things like that, right? So these having an escalator, a lift, those are like basic things. But once you come to the city, it's all good. So I think in town hall and in at least in Vineyard Station, it's pretty at least neat now. You have all those. So people started thinking about accessibility. So that's good, and that's what I meant by it could be not permanent, it could be temporary or situational.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
testing for accessibility. Coming back to your
Yeah.
original question, so number of things that you could test for accessible images, landmarks, color contrasts, and stuff like that, and at various levels, right? So you could do from an end-to-end testing perspective, what you could do at an integration level, what you could do at a unit testing level, and from a static check perspective. So the static check is coming from Kensey Dodd's, testing trophy model. So there's a number of things that you could do at a different level. I think from definitely from manual testing. So this is a friendly disclaimer that I usually do.
Hmm.
So it is very important to have someone
Yeah.
with real disabilities to test. A number of companies do that as a contracting, so they could deploy someone with real disabilities and with experience with this digital technologies to give you some real user feedback on what is your experience and all that. So it's more like an extended version of your user testing experience, right? So
Yeah.
this is more focused on accessibility, unlike the other one would be focused on usability.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the current stat that you showed up previously was that 40 or 50% of accessibility features can be caught using tools and code review processes and whatnot. But there's still a large gap where the only way you're going to find accessibility issues is through manual exploratory testing practices as well, or getting people who use those tools every day and are really comfortable with them. It's also really fascinating to watch, someone with vision impairment use screen reader technology to navigate your web too.
Right, right. So now I've tried having that experience, right? Um, so before actually we got in, so this happened in IAG when I was there, right? So we actually had someone coming in from one of the consultancies that I spoke about to come and audit our application. But before that, I just wanted to give a try run for myself to see what if what's the difference between an actual person using a screen reader. for navigate for applications, and what, as a tester, putting in my tester handset, and how do I do it. And there's a lot of difference, of course, I would say, because you could always learn a thing or two, but it's
Mm.
always a difference when people do it for life, right? So that's how different it is. But yeah, I think a number of things. Screen readers, of course, cannot be automated. It has to be always through manual. But these are, a couple of plugins
Okay.
that could automatically catch things for you,
Yep.
like Expedia, color contrast analyzer for vision, low vision or color vision impairment for people. So this is something very important, right? So as Sam, you mentioned it rightly, not many people, I think people know that, they have to create accessible applications, but how do they do it?
Mm.
Do they have enough knowledge about it? Well, I think this whole misconception that, they all know that, okay, there is something exists called ARIA attributes, accessible rich internet applications, if we include those attributes, it becomes easy that applications become accessible. That's what they think.
No,
So it's more
sometimes you make it
around,
worse.
yeah, it makes it worse, and that's what, the next slide is all about. So it's not always needed, so you could
Yeah.
overcomplicate. I think, apologies, this slide is a little
Yeah. It's,
misaligned in
yeah. Yeah.
slide share, but yeah, I think
Yeah.
the whole point is, it's not always needed, but use it wisely,
Yeah.
is my point. And yeah,
Yeah. I
we
think
could
that
share this link as well so that
I
people
think
could take
that'll
a
be
look
good.
later.
We'll collect a bunch
Yeah,
of links before we publish on YouTube. It's but my general recommendation for if you want an accessible web page, the most accessible technology is HTML, plain old HTML. No fancy JavaScript or
no
anything.
fancy.
If
Yeah.
you just structure your web content with good headings, that it's structured, and put things in lists, screen readers already know how to read HTML. They're being built to read HTML. It's just when you get into that custom JavaScript or that custom date picker or that custom little calendar element. Sure, it looks nice and the designers are really impressed and the engineers are pleased with themselves that they built it, but screen reader can't use it.
Absolutely. It's more like you have a fancy dress at what it you if you don't fit in the dress, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You can't really use it. That's exactly, it is all about.
Yeah, but I think from what I've seen from some of the accessibility audits we've done in the bank, 60% of the issues that come up are just related to the structure of the HTML content on the page.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. As I said, I think that slide talked about the native browser context will already pick up, right? So it's not necessary to use the ARIA attributes always, but it would certainly, it's there to help you out, but don't overcomplicate it. Yeah, I
Yep.
think that you summed up well, so that's how it goes.
Yep. Anyway, I think we're getting close to time. If anyone's on the Twitch channel and has any questions, I am monitoring that as well. But I haven't seen any conversations come up so far. But I've really enjoyed this conversation, Manoj.
Yeah, I think I didn't realize it's already 50 minutes past, since we started. It's been fantastic, multiple things that we covered. Really, really enjoying this. Yeah.
Cool. Do you have any farewell notes to anyone who's final notes on whoever's watching the live stream or on YouTube later?
Cool. I think I didn't really think about this part, but usually, I think if you're a tester or, being in automation, don't feel low that, you need to catch up on learning more language before you come on to contribute to any open source for that matter. So almost all the open source projects need some help. So go, check out what help they need. Even it could come from, so as I said, I've been a documentation contributor as well, and I'm not a native English speaker. So that, really comes up. There could be a lot of grammatical mistakes, right? So if you're good at English, come back, come review the documentation, make some grammatical changes. So you could start as simple as that, and then go by adding some technical things that that is in there already, and then contribute code and stuff like that. So I think in short, the real message is step out of your comfort zone if you're into. It's really important. The world is getting very competitive, a lot of things to catch up. So while I was learning GraphQL, I also learned that there is already something called gRPC from Google. So my next action item for me to learn all about gRPC, and there's a hell lot of stuff in cloud native applications, AWS,
Mm.
Google, and Kubernetes for that. I have a couple of open source repositories on that.
Mm.
So if you are into someone who wanted to learn some of those cloud native technologies like Docker and Kubernetes, and if you're someone coming from an automation background, you could easily get started with that, because the way that how I learn things is where I am from and which background that I'm from. So of course we are from testing and automation background. So if I want to learn Kubernetes, of course I start looking at a couple of the official documentations on how to get started, and then try to see how closely I could relate to the work that I do. So by doing that, I achieve my personal goal of learning something new as well as doing something for the community as well. And that's how really I started with open sourcing a couple of my Docker Selenium, and how you could deploy your Docker containers into Kubernetes. So that's how I started. I think that is something has been really working for me very well. So you could try doing that, and if it doesn't work out, come and let me. We can have a chat and find better ways of working. But
Mm.
I think these things are good enough. Will keep you engaged and motivated,
Yeah.
even if you're not happy with where you are and what you're doing. There's always something that could keep you going up in speed. And working on open source, researching a bit on new technologies has always keep me up to the pace. And yeah, I think
Yeah.
those are my
I'm really excited to learn more about serverless architecture using cloud native applications. There's, I think, both Google and AWS offer serverless functions, and I find that really cool because if you're interested in microservices, these are tiny. They're like tiny little. There's a single function that you
right.
deploy on a single instance that gets spun up or spat down whenever you need one. And I think that's a really
Absolutely.
interesting approach to mobile app development.
Yeah, I think if you look at back days, right, I'm sure you would have this experience also. When MongoDB came in new, so it came as like a schema-less, database, and back then you're looking at RDBMS, MySQL, SQL, jumping onto new stuff like MongoDB was a big leap, and of course it has its own advantage. I think speaking of serverless, I think if you're interested, Thoughtworks is doing a webinar on serverless, unboxing serverless. I think that's the title. So I think that would give you a brief idea of what is serverless and how stuff works. I think I'm going to join that. So if you are into learning that, I think that will be really helpful.